LawCall. We see a lot of camera footage these days from things like Ring cameras and other surveillance devices. So you want to make sure and reach out quickly, because it's important to be able to prove both the liability aspect and the damage as well. So Jeff, make sure and give us a call so we can make sure and help you out, because just because they're not answering doesn't mean you don't have a claim, and that's something that needs to be pursued vigorously to make sure that your son can be properly compensated. So thank you for that, and without further ado, Cameron Fuqua making his debut on LawCall. Cameron, you haven't been here before, so introduce yourself briefly to the audience.
Sure. Good evening. Thank you for having me, Ted. And I'm excited for tonight. Hopefully looking forward to some interesting, challenging questions from the community out there. And I am the owner and operator of the Fuqua firm here in town. We're a law firm that primarily focuses on real property disputes, anything with your neighbor, or perhaps easements, foreclosures, evictions, all that type of stuff. And then additionally, we do quite a bit of condo HOA law work. So we've represented several associations in that realm, but we've also started to help homeowners as well, dealing with some of these community associations as well.
Very good. Cameron, I believe you're originally from West Virginia. Is that not correct?
You got it. Go Mountaineers.
There you go. I'm glad to have you down here in God's country now, and helping us out with all the property legal needs of the Panhandle. So make sure and reach out to Cameron if you have an issue with those different scenarios. I know one you mentioned, Cameron, is the HOA or Condominium Association arena, and I know that there have been, especially in light of the things that happened down in Miami with that disaster and other situations in Florida law, there's been some changes and evolutions to the statutes that govern those associations. I know there's a lot, but give us some high points of some of the issues that people need to be aware of that they might not know, or the current landscape of that area.
Sure. So really in the last 3 years have been two major legislative updates they've had. One was a couple years ago related to the Miami condo collapse that they had. And the big thing probably for people listening is that impact, albeit probably is most impactful to our southern Florida colleagues. Up here, even in Panama City, we're going to see some ripple effects where those condo associations now, the assessments are just going to start going through the roof, especially related to insurances and those kinds of things. And then our second most recent legislative update.
Cameron, let me wait to get a pause on that. We got a phone call from Jesse. We're going to get back on that second point. But Jesse, if you would go ahead with your question.
Yeah, me and my boss went to look at a job for a fella, and he had some dogs, and he told us not to get out until he got there. We waited, and then asked him, was it all right to get out of the truck to look at the job? And he said, yeah, and we got out of the truck and was standing there talking about 30 minutes, and got ready to get back in the truck, and his dog's attacking him. And this man's not want to take care of none of the bills or anything. He said that we were trespassing. Well, we were over there looking at a job. So, I mean, what legal rights do I have?
Right. Jesse, you're in Alabama, which is very similar but slightly different from Florida, and both Larry Perry and I are licensed in both Florida and Alabama. It sounds like you were invited on the property and had the right to be there, so that gentleman is going to have exposure and liability in this scenario, assuming you did nothing to provoke the dog. It doesn't sound like you did, Jesse. So, you know, as with Jeff, who emailed earlier about the landowner that wouldn't respond, just because they don't respond doesn't mean that that's the end of the analysis. So it's important that you reach out to us or someone like us to make sure that you can have that right preserved. Very typically, folks will have homeowners coverage on their homeowners policy that will provide coverage for scenarios like that. It may seem counterintuitive, but that is covered under a typical homeowners policy. But there can be exclusions for dogs, depending on the nature of the policy. So it's something that just has to be explored and investigated. But even if you don't have coverage, it does not mean that there isn't liability for it. We just have to make sure that there's a path of practical solution where there can be a recovery that can help you get compensated for whatever your losses may be, whether it's medical bills, any lost time from work, pain and suffering. So it's important that you get the medical treatment that you can that's necessary to make sure that you can get better. Make sure and photograph your injuries, have all of that documented, and then we'll be willing to take care of that and look at that and see what we can't do for you. So Jesse, make sure you give us a call so that we can help you with that. And Cameron,
Yeah.
I know I'd interrupted you there, but I want to make sure we take care of Jesse there. But you were on the second point or highlight of some of those HOA changes.
Sure. So as mentioned, the first one being be mindful when purchasing these condos and because of those potential increased assessments. And then the second most important legislative change actually just happened this year, July 1. And several changes went into effect. Really the main change, which I think the everyday person's going to experience, is related to the fining process and things that are entitled and not entitled. So the big thing is now, and without kind of diving too deep into it, generally the concept now is that you as a homeowner have effectively 7 days to cure any violations.
Part of that due process
exactly.
before they can fine you.
Versus historically, people could be fined immediately for a violation, and so now they've provided that. They've also added some specific stuff related to Christmas decorations even. We get a full 2-week kind of notice to get our Christmas decorations down. So there's some added things there as well, and it will help homeowners, I think, long term, but it'll definitely take some ironing out, I think, between the community associations out there in Panama City.
And it's important to remember those assessments carry real consequences if you don't pay them, because they can end up being a lien on your property that can be foreclosed, similar to a mortgage. So they can become real taxing if you have $120,000 assessment because you have to up the reserves for insurance or have to pay for a new premium on one of these larger buildings. So make sure and do your due diligence and understand the nature and magnitude of what those can be. Make sure you look at those disclosures, because there's a lot of disclosures that are required to be given before you purchase a condo. And I know it can be voluminous, but make sure you are looking at that properly, engaging an attorney to help you assist with that process if it becomes overwhelming for you. But those are all things that need to be thought of and factored into those decisions. I know another one that we see frequently, Cameron and folks ask me about, is it even worth it to buy title insurance? Does it even make sense? And people are like, I don't know why I'd ever do that. And I look at them and I say, I don't know why you ever wouldn't do it. But it becomes second nature for me. But Cameron, just explain some of the reasons and the pitfalls if you don't get that kind of insurance to protect yourself.
So title insurance, first off, is when you buy a property and you go through an actual closing or title company, and the insurance provides that after you've purchased the property, if there's some kind of a defect to your title, meaning somebody says you owe money, somebody says that you actually don't own part of your land that you thought you did.
There was a lien that somebody missed way back.
Yeah. Then you can go back to your title insurance, make a claim, and they're the ones who ultimately will pay for it, which can be important. The importance of that, I mean, I just ran into this recently, probably a week or so ago, but you can even have easements that are recorded and maybe were not referenced in your deed, and learn about those after closing, which diminish the value of your property, and now you need to go recoup that money, and the only realistic path is through the title insurance.
Right.
Unfortunately for that client, they had done a quitclaim deed, which didn't come with that title insurance, so now they're really stuck holding that bag for the diminished value of property.
And those easements can come in varying sizes and shapes and burdens, depending on what they are.
Absolutely, and but I've seen them all the way back. I dealt with a title insurance claim where we tracked back title insurance all the way to the 1970s, because that title insurance is actually perpetual.
Very good
in nature.
And I know one that I have seen in my prior practice that comes up, and you can have boundary disputes, and that's especially, you got to make sure and have a survey when you get the property, but that can be very expensive to litigate on your own dime. But if you have that title insurance, just like if you get in a car accident where your insurance will pay for an attorney to defend you in those scenarios, similarly title insurance, if you get into a scenario where there's a boundary dispute, assuming you had the survey and have that boundary insured, you will have an attorney that will be hired to help assist with that. So that can be a very, very valuable tool, and in the scheme of things, title insurance is comparatively affordable compared to a lot of the insurances
most definitely.
we pay for. We're used to getting really, really high health insurance and auto insurance and homeowners insurance premiums. Title insurance is much more reasonable and is a good value bang for your buck, and I would strongly encourage anyone to look into that if they're purchasing a piece of property, especially here in Florida. So that's something I'm sure you see day in and day out. I think you mentioned to me, Cameron, you also do help some small businesses out and in general counsel kind of information stuff. What are some of the situations you're seeing right now with small businesses that people need to be aware of and on the lookout for?
Yeah, sure. So our firm does small business representation. We like to say from inception, incorporation through dissolution.
Very
good. We really try to handhold those small business owners through their day-to-day problems. One of the biggest things I see, and I feel like we're beating the dead horse on insurance here,
right.
but is we get these business owners and there's small business, local people, and lo and behold, somebody makes a claim, and either they didn't have insurance or the insurance doesn't cover that claim, and they're stuck with a gigantic attorney fee bill,
right.
and that
very important
becomes very burdensome on them. So what we try to do is provide a resource for those small business owners to answer those questions ahead of time.
Right.
So that way it cuts that out. And
Very
so a number of times we've seen that happen is numerous.
Very good. Well, we're going to take our first break. Remember, those phone lines are open, 850-392-1544. You can email us at lawcall@wmbb.com. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Law Call. You've got Ted Howell with Cameron Fuqua here today or tonight. And during the break, we got a phone call, I believe, from Lee in Washington County. Lee, go ahead with your question.
Yes, I know this ain't got nothing to do related to what you're talking about, homeowners, but I've been living in my grandma's house for 18 years. I'm a disabled veteran, and I was supposed to be awarded to live there for the rest of my life. And about 3 years ago, I got booted out. If I'd have stayed there and made them take me to court, I could have got help through the VA to get a place to live, but I didn't want to take no animosity towards the family. So I left, and they moved me around the house, the corner of the road, an old house over 80 years old, rotten floors. I've been living here 3 years. I'm fixing to get booted out again. Do I need to stay here and make them take me to court and then get help through the VA, or is there something I can do, or what, you know? I don't know. I don't want to bring no problem with nobody.
Right, it's a very interesting question, Lee. I mean, typically, with the grandmother situation, it's important that you, and we've seen this situation a lot and gotten a lot of calls about this over the years. It's important to probate those things in a timely fashion, and it depends on how grandma wanted to leave that property to who had that ultimate legal right. But, Cameron, with respect to his living situation now, a lot of that depends on what his legal status is and how he got on that property.
It is, and first off, Lee, thanks for the call tonight, and thank you for your service.
Absolutely.
Much appreciated. My first instinct when I was hearing that question was actually with respect to, really, when we're dealing with real property, we want things in writing.
Yes.
And that's one of the number one things we want out there, and so it's hard to answer some of these questions until you review what is in writing and what's not.
Right.
And so, with that said, though, yeah, absolutely. If you've been living there for 3 years and maybe you're under a lease agreement and you've got certain rights and entitlements through that lease agreement, and you feel like they're infringing on those, absolutely reach out to an attorney, and hopefully the VA, I know they have tons of great resources, can assist with that.
And I know there's a lot of misconception that I've heard from people about what is and is not adverse possession in the state of Florida. And the state of Florida is pretty strict on the requirements, and it essentially requires, this is a very oversimplification, but it is going to require that you've been paying taxes on the property on top of a couple of different elements depending on whether or not you have a written instrument or not and things of that nature. But it's a difficult burden to establish, and it's a lengthy burden time. It's 7 years typically. So that's generally not going to be an avenue that's going to be very successful most of the times. And if you do not have a legal written instrument like Cameron's discussing, you probably ultimately will have to leave the property, but it's best to try to always no matter what the situation is, to pick up the phone, talk to people, see if you can't work something out. As Cameron noted, you were a disabled veteran. We applaud that. We need to make sure that there's room for you, somebody's getting you taken care of, and I'm sure there's somebody that would be willing to cooperate and work with you. You just need to make sure and have that discussion. So give Cameron or somebody like Cameron a call, and they'll see what they can't do to help you out, Lee, because we're real sorry you're in that situation. But that does bring up, that whole landlord-tenant dynamic. We had an email from Jeff earlier about an apartment complex, and you can have these large mass landlords, and then you can have a couple of smaller properties, and you can have these family situations.
Family members.
But
all
even,
the time,
Cameron, let me ask you this: if it's a family member, do you still need to have that lease documented in some form or fashion?
If it's my family member, I guarantee it'll be in writing. So,
well, and as you mentioned, with any time you're dealing with an interest in real estate, even if it is a piece of, even if it's a lease, it's always, there's some exceptions, but it's still better to have that in writing.
Oh yeah.
And there's in that statute, there's a lot of statutes that govern landlord-tenant. And I know we saw a lot of issues with that after Hurricane Michael.
Oh, yeah.
But do you do any of that landlord-tenant work,
We do.
Cameron?
And we've represented both tenants and landlords in the situations. One of our big philosophies as a firm is ultimately we really want the right practical solution for all of our clients. And so we, a lot of times with our tenants especially, we'll talk them through reasonable negotiations with those landlords because ultimately once that relationship's broken, it's hard to fix.
Right.
And so nobody really wants to live there for years on end with a broken, tumultuous relationship.
No, and it's important if you do get in those situations that you make sure and do everything you can to try to mend those fences. And then if you get into that situation, that you're reading the notices that are sent to you.
Don't ignore them.
Don't ignore them, because there's, as mentioned, it's very statutorily driven. There's some very short deadlines, and there's some very definitive things that you have to do if you get certain notices. So if you do get one of those notices, make sure you reach out to a law firm so that you can get that assistance to make sure you at least know your legal right. Because I tell this all the time to my personal injury clients: knowledge is power, and there's a lot of things that you just don't know, and you don't know what you don't know. And it's easy to Google things, but people can pay to have things at the top of Google, and so it's not, the primacy of the search is not the best information necessarily, but the folks that have paid to have that information at the top. So make sure you're getting good information and a solid advice so that you know what you can do. I think I just got a note. We have an email, I believe. If we could put that up. My property includes part of a 6-acre pond shared with 2 other owners. The pond is divided about equally with the property lines running through it. Can I legally limit the use of my portion of the pond? One of the owners often allows people to launch boats to fish via his property. Of course, they usually hang out in my section. In my view, the pond is my backyard and these people are trespassing. That's Keenan. We need to get a quick little answer on this one. You got anything on that, Cameron?
I think my quick answer is make sure you have a survey to confirm it's actually your property, and assuming that it is, you can kind of do with your property what you want.
Right. And a lot of it's business. I mean, it sounds like small, so it's not navigable, so there's a lot of different issues. So make sure you reach out to Cameron. But we're going to need to take our last break of the night. But remember, those phone lines are open, 850-392-1544. Welcome back to Law Call. During the break, we had a call from Glenn from Jackson County. Glenn, go ahead with your question.
Yes, sir. My question is concerning our property.
Yes, sir.
Okay, it's 4 of us on the deed from the property, but we have one person on the property with us. He could continue to make changes to the house. It's one house on the property. We live in the house, and he continued to make changes to the house. He's literally got the yard cluttered with all kind of debris. And recently he pulled a trailer on the property, but he lives in the house. And he just continued to do things without the consent of the other people on the property.
No, very good, Glenn. And that's a situation we see not too uncommon when you have these joint ownership issues. Cameron, what's the situation? How do you resolve that?
Absolutely. So the rights are going to vary depending on quite a bit. But ultimately, if you're unhappy with what's going on, it's going to be what's called a partition sale, which is a court-ordered process that ultimately the property would be sold and the proceeds distributed.
Perfect. And then I just got a question. We had another an old question that we've seen many times about Hurricane Michael and a tree falling on your property and whose responsibility that is. And just the short answer is a hurricane is a natural disaster. That's not, generally speaking, going to be a liability of your neighbor. That's going to be your responsibility to clean that damage up if it's on your property. Sorry that happened. I'm sorry you're still dealing with that. I think we now are at our shout outs. I have a couple of photos I'd like to get to real quickly. This is Miss Taylor. Miss Taylor is Harriet Taylor in office mother-in-law and Kenny Taylor's mother. She passed away this past week. We love Miss Taylor, and great woman, and she's going to be sorely missed, and we're praying for Miss Taylor's family, Harriet, Kenny, and Raven, and she'll be sorely missed, like I say. We have another picture here. This is Olga with Mr. Larry there, and I think that's at some award ceremony. Looks like Larry's got a medal on, so that's very good there. Nice to see him looking good and getting back into shape. Cameron, quickly, you got any shout outs?
I don't. I just will say thank you to you and Larry and Chris for having me on tonight. It was a great time and really enjoyed it.
Very good. And the only other thing I had is my mother-in-law wanted me to give a shout out to Hutchinson Beach Elementary for getting a A's grade on their school. We'll be back next week with another show, and we hope to see you and hear your calls. Thank you again.